Welcome, welcome to another weekly edition of Account-Based Friday, where we talk all things go-to-market strategy. Today is going to be a great session. We're going to be talking about generative AI, GEO, and SEO, a very, very hot topic for B2B marketers. I will briefly say Meg and I have done 300 plus episodes. There's a QR code in the upper corner here that you can download or get routed directly to those episodes. But we've got a very special guest that I want to kind of cut to right away. David and I have known each other for several years, and people in LinkedIn world know that I know a lot of people. David is the authority on SEO, and when he began some work for us at B2B Fusion, probably about a year or so ago, we've 5x'd our revenue and 5x'd our traffic, both from an impression as well as a click side of things, through the fundamentals that David has offered. Now, his professional credentials go way beyond that. He runs the world's largest community as the moderator for SEO. So he knows a thing or two beyond his own agency of SEO. And he's been knee deep in this whole AI transformation. So I'm super excited to welcome David back again. This is his second time. And I'm going to hand it over to Meg, and we'll begin kind of our questions and answers. But one thing before I do, just as a reminder, if you have questions, and I fully expect that you will, drop them in LinkedIn, and we have the ability to promote them up. So this session is much for you as it is for us. We're hoping that you'll interact live. So with that, Meg, you want to fire away?
All right. Welcome, everyone. And David, thank you so much for joining us. This is like you're the perfect person to have on right now. There's so many questions out there about SEO and GEO and what should I be doing and how should I be staffing and, do I have what I need? Do I have to blow everything up? All sorts of crazy going on. So you're just the guy to help us sort that out for people. But I think maybe the place to start with sorting that out is tell us how an AI-led search works. What do we need to know about what's actually happening when we put in that query?
That's a great question, and thanks for having me back again. And these are questions we have to ask every day. It's a whole new horizon, and the manufacturers, the makers of these LLM tools don't really tell us how they work, right? So we have to reverse engineer it, much like we had to do with SEO for the last 26 years. I think one of the most interesting things is that the query that we used to put into Google, those matched the results we got back. And I think what a lot of people are seeing now is when they go and search to see how their own brands come up in their own segments and industries and verticals, they don't necessarily match, and maybe they think they're being excluded. And one of the top tools for testing this is Perplexity, because it gives you the sort of working out tab that ChatGPT is missing. And what we are seeing is that what we call query fan out. So if you put in a search phrase like what's the top CRM for SaaS companies in 2025. Instead of it searching for that, what they actually do is break them out into smaller searches, run those in a search engine like Google or Bing. So ChatGPT will use Bing and Perplexity will use Google. And then they take those results and synthesize them, which means they give you the most commonality between all the different search results. And they look like they're doing fantastic amounts of research, but it's a little bit sort of thinner than that. So we have to now look at, well, this is the query we used to show up for, but now we have to try and reverse engineer what the LLM is breaking that into and appear for all of those different queries. So it's actually gotten more complex in a way.
Yeah, well, and with that complexity, I think, folks are wondering what they should be doing. And in particular, they're asking the question of, well, I've put all this effort into my content. And I'm doing all this work to put things out there on my website and other places. Shouldn't that be good enough? And in the end, does just plain old good content win? Or do you need to be a little bit more specific and strategic about it, given what you've just described? What advice in terms of resourcing your content production, but then also in terms of does the best content win?
I think the problem with the best content is subjectivity, right? Is that, from whose point of view? And LLMs and search engines can't pick that, right? They can't decide subjective things that are very, that vary from person to person. So I think you have to consider a whole new world of searches and a whole new world of writing content. So for example, it's not just about describing your product and hoping that putting in the most amount of research is going to win. it didn't work in a Google world. I think a lot of people thought that, content structure, research that put into it, citations and things like that made a difference. They didn't really. And I don't think it's going to change in LLMs. I don't think LLMs are going to appreciate content any better than Google did. And I see a lot of disinformation and misinformation, especially in SEO forums, talking about it on X and LinkedIn. People are saying that, oh, you just need an LLM.txt or schema, or if you follow your brand guidelines, you'll get rewarded for it. I think what we have to realize is that people are putting in different types and more complex questions. So they're asking things like, what is the best X for my industry? And they're adding things that they wouldn't expect Google to answer. So they might define their industry more. They might define their company size more. So what's a good CRM system for a company with 100 people? Now, if we go back to the start of your question, most content writers and most brands wouldn't have had content that says, we're the best CRM for government for 1 to 500 people, right? It didn't seem like a great article or a blog post, but now we have to start thinking that way. And that's why I think you see a lot of Reddit and LinkedIn pages in being quoted by LLMs. It's not because they have a preference for it. It's just that that's how people type in a forum. So if somebody says, hey, I've got 50 employees, should I get Salesforce or should I get HubSpot? Someone's going to say, hey, you probably want to start with HubSpot. And that's where it's getting its queries from. So we now have to consider our content from a number of different angles and points of view, and almost sort of like insert ourselves into the conversation.
Yeah, there's that's really interesting about the insertion into the conversation piece, and then you've got the technology layer behind it. I think just in this last week, I'm thinking about Cloudflare making an announcement of saying, we're not going to let AI crawlers, if I read it correctly, go on new websites. And it creates kind of this other bifurcation too of kind of the haves and the have-nots of AI and not having AI access. In a way, it almost penalizes websites, but a bit of a prisoner's dilemma. But I'm curious, like, where do you see the opportunities and threats here with generative AI and searches overall? And maybe that's one example that I kind of just answered the question with, or maybe not. I don't know. Where else do you see the opportunities and threats?
I think that there's a lot of opportunity for brands who are willing to move beyond the sort of branded domain theory that we've been led with for the last 20 years, and to start looking at multi-domain strategies. This is a key opportunity / weakness of search engines. So if you're wondering why, if people search for Microsoft, why does Microsoft.com rank first? It's because it's got Microsoft.com. And we've learned from that, and a lot of companies just have their branded domains, but I think it's a strategy that's been working for a long time. For example, a company I used to work at, Kemp Technologies, which was acquired by Progress Software out of Boston 5 years ago. That was a company of 25 people that I joined when I was living back in Ireland in 2012. And one of the sites we built in 2015 was a site called freeloadbalancer.com. So load balancer is a critical part of networking infrastructure. It's deep in the technology stack. Everything from Google to Exchange Server runs on it. And freeloadbalancer.com still ranks when people search for free load balancer, much better than the branded domain like Kemp Technologies. And what's interesting is that even though Progress is $1 billion brand, they're still using that site as a lead gen tool. It's very, very well branded. So you don't know if you're on the Kemp site, the Progress site, or free load balancer. It's the color scheme, the layout all is all in the same sort of brand guideline book. But that site, if you're on Perplexity and ask it for, hey, what's a free enterprise grade load balancer? Because of the domain name, that's ranking better. And that's a threat as well. If you're a brand and you don't want to adopt multi-brand strategies, your competitors will, right? Guerrilla tactics always win out. Small companies need to eke out leads from the internet. And I think that's a really important thing for B2B marketers to consider. I don't see B2B marketers following with the Cloudflare example. There's no value to us blocking LLM bots from reading our content. If you're a content producer, I can understand it that you don't want to be used as free training for these LLM tools because these companies are getting a lot of return on their investment for that and you're getting nothing. But I think if we look at how sites like G2, Capterra, Gartner, and so on ruled this sort of B2B comparison space, you can now insert yourself into your own comparison sites And if you don't do it, someone else absolutely will.
When you start working with a company that says, hey, I need to, put in place a strategy to get this right, to make sure that I'm not locked out of people finding us when they need to, what kind of a team or a person are you hoping they have on the other side to work with you? What would be sort of the ideal set of resources for a company to have in place?
That's a really good question, Meg. I think having people who can produce the necessary content. I don't think content has to be long. I don't think we're going to get return from this long form content that we've been seeing in the past with people quoting like 5,000 words and so on. I think what we need to do is look at what questions are people asking and how do we competently answer that. As an SEO, it's very difficult for me to understand the mechanics of a search engine and the mechanics of, say, a VPN company or a firewall company or a hosting company. And so we can get a lot of data from places like Google Ads, queries, the pages that ChatGPT is sending people to, and figure out what people are searching for. And having people that are able to produce that content very quickly, that content is accurate and matches what the brand wants to say about it, and are dynamic to turn around that very quickly, rather than spending a month on a blog post and overproduction. I think overproduction is going to disappear. And one of the reasons for that is your content is being brought into the LLM tool, right? So the user is reading it as pure text. So all of the design, all of the images that you used in the past, that doesn't matter anymore. And it's also being rewritten. So I think the heavy production values aren't as necessary for the top and middle of the funnel stages. So I think having people who can take lots and lots of different questions from different angles and convert that into content is going to be very important, because the LLMs won't do that for you. They're not going to take a product specification page and turn that into use cases and case studies. We need people to do that. I think people that are interested in numbers are going to be very important. So we might have spent 10 hours working on a blog post, but if we only got one person reading it, then we really miss something. And being able to take that and repost it and re-experiment. I think we see a lot of that in the creative communities in YouTube and TikTok, where people post a video and they go, oh, that wasn't a hit, and they keep retrying. Whereas I think before we had this sort of newspaper-esque style attitude to publishing, where we published it, it's done, we have to leave it up there with the date stamp. You don't. You can absolutely go and republish it. Nobody cares if it was printed on a Monday or a Thursday. But the key is to keep trying.
Speaking of numbers and kind of looking at the numbers, I guess in a way you've got Google Analytics that works well from a cookie perspective, yet you now have AI that doesn't really cookie. Any advice around the measurement, or what are key indicators that we might be looking at, or even how Google Analytics, is it more relevant, less relevant? Like, where do you see that evolution?
That's such a great question, because we're, in a sense, our SEO and our ads and our social media reports were actually so evolved compared to what we have in LLM, which is silence, right? There's definitely a fog of war developing. I think GA4 is a great spot to use for tracking. All of the search tools will come in as refers, and ChatGPT uses a UTM signal, which is ChatGPT. And what you could do is look at what pages they land in. So in analytics, you're able to say, look, show me all of the referral traffic from ChatGPT and show me the landing page. And from the landing page, if the landing page is called, for example, enterprise tool for defense contractors, then you could pretty much quickly establish that somebody was looking for enterprise tools for defense contractors. And I think, and then if you use key events in GA4, you can actually measure the number of form fills and signups, which is how most B2B marketers will measure their bottom of the funnel metrics. And I think GA4 is perfectly positioned for that. I think GSC continues to be a good tool in terms of figuring out what people are searching for. I'm seeing more and more tools develop. Reddit's a great place to find these. SEMrush have some fantastic tools around measuring queries in ChatGPT and building a SERP style report. They emailed me a report the other day that I thought was really interesting. They said by 2028, AI traffic will mirror Google organic traffic, that's a very short turnaround. That's 2.5 years, which is really scary. So people are building the tools. We're a little bit behind, but I think GA4 will be the most important spot unless the LLM tools develop a GSC version themselves, which I hope they do.
We've got a good question from Lenice in chat, and she is saying great discussion. Thank you, David. And is wondering about how much weight sites like G2 and also how much do videos influence GEO or AEO?
That's a great question. And I think because companies are seeing themselves missing or invisible in some of these queries, that I think there's a sort of misunderstanding that LLMs are becoming their own search engines, and they're not yet, right? So something I was saying the other day, LLMs can barely keep up with the compute power they need to build the models that they want to. Googleplex, which is the name for the data centers that Google stores the entire World Wide Web information, are 100 times bigger than what ChatGPT is playing with, what Perplexity is playing with, because they just don't have the same capital resources that Google has. They can't build both. You can't chase the LLM compute power and the Googleplex compute power. So they are very dependent on Google and Bing. They're not building a different engine with different ratings and different ranking criteria. Where G2 and other comparison sites will weigh in is if they rank in that query fan out that Google or Bing gives them. I don't think that they're going to G2 with the exception of their fundamental classes, right? So basically, when an LLM is being built, it trains, for example, Google is training Gemini on Reddit, Grok is trained on X content, and ChatGPT on a mix of others. Apart from that fundamental content, when it goes to do a search, it's very much what's in Bing's index. So if G2 ranks for that topic, it will definitely weigh in. And that's why I think the opportunity for marketers is to build their own comparison sites or their own informational sites that will co-rank. And by appearing more than once, which is how we look at traditional search, like your domain just comes up once in the list of 10 results, there's an opportunity for you to use a second domain to rank more than once. I think videos show a lot where they rank, but I don't think that because you have a video or because you're on G2, you're going to perform better in LLM. It may just be that G2 is better SEO, for example, and that's why they're appearing so much. So I think absolutely continue to drive that strategy of being omnipresent and visible everywhere is definitely good, but also consider creating content, comparative content yourself. And you don't have to do direct brand to brand comparisons. You can do industry-wide comparisons where you compare yourself to maybe doing it manually or doing it in a spreadsheet and show how your solution is better, for example. That content has every chance of ranking just as well.
I love that idea about kind of that generic ranking or comparison, because that also gets you out of the conversation of me versus another competitor. And sometimes I wince when I see that, because you're always going to be the very best on that. But the manual process, that's a really, really interesting approach. I should have paid more attention. I was I was at a G2 conference a couple weeks ago, and long story, but I ended up sitting at a table with the CEO of G2. Thought he said he may have opened his API up for all of the data on G2 to be accessible by the search engines. But I also think that search engine or AI can kind of bypass the whole gated aspect now of a lot of these sites. Do you know any of the mechanics of how that might work, either kind of bypassing the gated information or even what G2 may have announced there?
Not 100%, but I do know that that AI agents essentially can connect to API tools, and if they understand the API connectivity, they can vacuum out data. It's also a great place for LLM tool builders themselves to connect to API data sources. It's much faster and it's much easier than working with HTML data. HTML data can come with 90% of it could be bloatware or designware. In other words, layout, styles, fonts, colors, and these things do not matter to AI agents. And I think AI agents that of the future, like for example, Perplexity brought out its own browser for Mac OS. called Comet. You can, instead of setting up a tab where you do a normal search, you can set up an agent and get them to do a number of processes like analyze data from API, which is going to be much more efficient.
What as companies are thinking about what they need to budget for next year, and they've got, whatever their investment is in traditional SEO, what would you say they should be starting to do to shift part of that budget to something different, or do they just need to keep that in place? And is this an add? Is this an and, not an or? How should people be thinking about budgeting in this space?
I think watch how much traffic you're getting. I think what people are seeing with decoupling, maybe accelerating the idea that Google is becoming less important, and it's sort of a red herring. Decoupling means that people are seeing impressions go up and clicks go down. What's happening is a lot of that sort of basic traffic that was coming to your website, for example, what is a CRM system, which is not necessarily an ICP target, that's now being consumed over on the AI search tool. And you don't really have to worry about that user as much. And I think a lot of people are saying, look, the AI user who gets through to the website is a much more educated, much more high intent user. That's most likely to be true. It's not always going to be true. But I think the number and the complexity of queries means that people have to invest more in content and SEO. I think it's a case of more SEO, more video. So if you had a large amount of Google traffic and that's disappearing, you have to look at what is that being eaten up by LLMs, and you can look at that from traffic coming in via Google Analytics. And if that's going up faster than you're losing traffic, then you have to pivot faster. And so I think it's a bit of an and budget over your SEO budget, but I think everything you do for SEO will continue to deliver for LLMs. It's just a change in how people ask questions and how you rank. I think if you had a budget for new, it would be for building co-ranking domains, building content out on other sites. Like it or not, LLMs are still based on PageRank, which is the love it or hate it part of Google, which is working on backlinks. I think a lot of people think that maybe LLMs are smarter and more sophisticated and they can glean out more intelligent content. I don't think they can. And I think we're still in a world where we have to rank in Google and Bing in order to rank in an LLM, not that an LLM is a separate system. I could be wrong in that in a year, but I would put all of my money on they're going to need Google and Bing to help them decide what content to synthesize.
You had mentioned the more and the and those are tough words right now for a lot of marketers to digest because everybody's being asked to do more with less.
Right. Absolutely.
But what I'm hearing you say is it's almost like a change of focus. Not necessarily, you might even have existing resources. You still need to do the SEO, but maybe it's a little less on the SEO, a little bit more on the AI with existing resource. If you're in a situation where you can't get that more or even on the content person, maybe you're the content person. What I'm hearing you say is maybe they're shifting in focus. Am I hearing you right on that?
Yeah, I think, if you look at, for example, the production cycle for a blog post, right? So you want to write a thought leadership piece and you look at all the components that feed into it. Somebody will have to write it. Somebody will have to check it. Maybe if it's a small company, the CEO will want to have a quick glance at it. You'll need an image which you'll either buy from a stock system, or you've got an internal graphic team that you raise a ticket for to get a graphic back. A lot of those things disappear, where I think the content writer is going to use AI a lot more to help the scale of production. So they might write a brief, they'll write a writing guideline for the LLM, and then use that to produce different versions. So previously, one of the handcuffs we've had is we write a blog post, we can't put the same post on Medium or LinkedIn because we're worried that Google won't rank it, or that because of duplicate content, and the production time is longer. I think now the time that goes into writing one single blog post could easily be 50 different blog posts, or 50 different stubs or articles, or even a script for a video. And then you can use AI to, like Google's VO, to produce a video, and also the images for the blog and for social media. So it's a shift in the number of keywords we want to cover for the same amount of effort. And then if you look at where we spent money on syndication, you might now want to build your own subdomain. I think that you've already got your graphics and logo design, so you don't have to re-incur that cost. It's just a cost of building a new separate domain name on a $12, $20 domain. So it's a different spend, where the spend is in the scaling of content, not the sort of dressing up of content, if that makes sense. I think because it's being synthesized, all of that formatting, it's like sending an email in plain text. That's how you have to think of it. You may even rank with just text files, right, as a possibility, because LLMs strip all of that font and design away from it.
And kind of thinking about some of the things that you hear that are just plain wrong out there. You did a great post recently about a number of the misconceptions. What are the top 1 or 2 things that people seem to repeat that just aren't true and people need to stop thinking it?
I think LLMs.txt is definitely the biggest myth, right? I mean, it comes from robots.txt, which is a very technical term that your web team used to look after, that just simply tells robots to ignore certain parts of the website. It's not a very sophisticated tool. It's not a sitemap. But for some reason, LLMs.txt is now being portrayed as the poster child of the sitemap for robots. Robots don't need sitemaps. They're fetching their the pages that they want to synthesize from search results or from other places. They're not really opening up your website and trying to analyze it and appreciate it and go through all your case studies. That isn't happening. That never happened with Google. And the second thing that I think is interesting is the appearance of schema. All right, and schema is just a description structure. But I think for people who don't understand it, or for people who want to be seen as experts or highly interested in an area, they're repeating a lot of these urban legends that are coming up. And so LLMs and schema are definitely red herrings. Schema is important, especially in old world search. But LLMs are the master of unstructured document data management. So if you look at startups like that are taking your driver's license and turning it into SQL type data, they don't need things like schema to help them understand it. So I think if you're reading, hey, you need LLMs, you need schema, you need to write in a special way, that should just set off a red flag that says, well, look, LLMs learn on places like Reddit, right? If they can understand data from Reddit, they don't need a special presentation there.
This is such a chock full of information conversation. I mean, we could continue on and on. If I can ask one more question, if you have the time, on the sales and marketing funnel, how do you see that changing now with the search mechanism? Like, what's different now in terms of either just the whole approach to sales and marketing funnel? Like, where do you see that changing?
I think people can make decisions faster. With search engines, search engines would surface the availability of tools, right? So is it Salesforce? Is it HubSpot? Is it Pardot? Is it Marketo? What does what? In the same single query, you can get an LLM to tell you which is the better one based on your background. So there's a lot less reading. So where people might have multiple trips to your website, might have multiple engagements with your social media, they could actually just drop in like bluebirds from nowhere. And so and be much better educated. And I think the scary part is going to be not knowing where that's coming from, right? Because we're kind of blinded at the moment. But I think if your sales funnel, your sales team and your marketing team should be more, better joined together. In other words, how did you find us? What were you looking for? And now the sales team actually may be the best source of information for marketers to find out how people are finding the product, what they asked for, and what they're particularly interested in. And then they can go back to their content strategy and adjust that. I think that's probably the most immediate change that we'll see.
So gosh, know your buyer works in a multitude of ways, including the shift to the new world of AI-led search. So thank you for reminding us about that. And knowing how your buyer looks for things, I think, is really, really critical. I think that's good advice for anyone at any time. David, thank you so much for joining us today. This is so helpful.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'll give you guys a link to share with the with the podcast afterwards that gives your users a prompt that lets them build a panel of buyers so they can test their messaging against those sort of virtual agents, and they can then give feedback about how that resonates. I think that's a really powerful tool that will help marketers build content and shape their messaging going forward much faster.
It's a fantastic idea. Definitely look forward to seeing that link. And you and I are doing a repeat performance in a couple hours for a smaller group of ABM people. So I want to thank you for that as well. And thank you for investing time here. It's such a topical area. So thanks again, David. And next week, Meg, we've got a special guest from NTT.
Yeah, we have Rachel Bell, who's the Vice President of Account-Based Marketing at NTT Data. She's been in that role for a couple of years now, and I think has a really, really important perspective on, complex opportunities and the role of ABM and kind of how that team works. And she's also thinking a lot about the kinds of skills her team needs as the work they do evolves and as the world evolves, and things like succession planning too. How do you make sure you've got a deep bench of people within your account-based program, especially when it's a big part of your go-to-market? So excited to have Rachel here next week.
Great. Good. We'll see you next week, same time.
Happy Friday.